Fighting climate change, providing job opportunities for young people, standing up for democratic values. The European Union is currently facing many challenges. Of course, there have been many challenges in the bloc's history, but especially now, as Europe is still grappling with the coronavirus pandemic, the question in which direction we are heading seems more vital than ever. Let's talk future of Europe. Hello and a very warm welcome. My name is Alexandra von Namm and I am excited to moderate this talk coming to you directly from the European Parliament. I am honored to have two distinguished guests with us today. Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019, a politician who has fought many battles on behalf of the European Union and whom former US President Donald Trump once described as a tough cookie. Thank you for your time. And a very warm welcome to our host, Manfred Weber, the chairman of the EPP Group in the European Parliament, a committed pro-European who is not afraid to speak plainly when it comes to the EU's weaknesses. Thank you very much for your time. So, if I may, let's start on a positive note. In your opinion, what has been the greatest achievement of the European Union no one ever thought would be possible?
There are many, but there is one European performance. That's the introduction of the euro, because nobody believed when we were starting the whole process, late in the 80s of last century, the law report and so on and so forth. Nobody really believed that this would be possible, mainly not in Germany, because all the German professors and others, some of the politicians of our own political family, they never thought that this could be achieved. It was thanks to the then governing governments. You have to remember that in Germany, the figures were not inviting Germany to become one of the first members of the euro area. I remember all these years, 91, 92 until 97, where Luxembourg was the only country to fulfill the so-called Maastricht criteria. I always said to myself that will not be sufficient to launch the economic and monetary union, but nevertheless, governments, mainly Kohl and others, they were able to put their figures in order. So, in fact, that's the greatest performance, and it impressed the other parts of the globe, because there too, others did not believe that this could be achieved. I will always remember a visit I paid to President Clinton back in '95, and he was inviting me to describe the State of the Union. And I was starting by saying that, of course, we will try to put into place this monetary union. I said, no, let's not talk about dreams. Let's talk about the Turkish membership. That was in '95. It hasn't changed so much. It has changed a little bit.
And in your opinion, Mr. Weber, what has been the biggest, greatest achievement of the European Union?
Well, I absolutely share that the euro is the biggest, let me say, practical step for creating a European Union, a real union. But if I may, I read in the last month a lot of history books again about the beginning before the First World War and so on and so forth. And even my grandfather grew up in a situation in Bavaria where he was told he should be proud to be a German and nothing else, full stop. And I think the biggest achievement of the European Union is that today we all, my father, the young generation, I myself, we have today a good feeling to be European, to have a feeling that this Europe belongs together, that we have a European identity in our mind. And that is this changing of thinking Therefore, you need structure. Therefore, you need an organization. You need a parliament. You need a commission. You need a structure behind to fix this, to make this sure, this process. But again, the biggest achievement is that we added to this national egoism, which costs us so much lives in this European Union and this Europe, that we added this European thinking, to be an European.
And now we're thinking how to move forward. The conference on the future of Europe has been officially launched, and the focus is clear. What has to be done to improve the European Union? What is the urgent issue, President Juncker?
Yes, I'm a little bit doubtful when it comes to this European conference because, in fact, this is not the first European conference, because when Giscard d'Estaing led the convention leading to the Constitutional Treaty of the European Union, everyone was involved. European Parliament, national parliaments, Commission, civil society, and nevertheless it led to a failure because the Dutch and the French voted no to this constitutional treaty. So the group gathering here in Brussels and elsewhere, but mainly in Brussels, was a very large one. All the elements of debate were introduced in that global debate of the European Convention. It's not enough to call for a European conference. This has to be a process driven by strong European convictions, and they are not unanimously shared by all those who will be stakeholders of this European conference. But I do think that further steps are needed, because in all the political areas which have to be revisited, there is a need for a better Europe, not only for more Europe. Maybe that in a given number of domains more Europe is needed, but a better Europe is needed everywhere. And I think that this has to be the motto, the leitmotif of this European conference. I'm welcoming this European conference. I don't like the way this has been organized, because now we have 3 presidents of the European conference changing after 6 months period. We have in the first semester of 2022 the French president. Later on we will have other presidents. So it seems to me to run the risk of becoming, after a certain period of time, rather chaotic. Unfortunately, the members of the European Parliament will actively participate in this, and they will bring the participants back to future realities.
But you just suggested that there is this danger of this being another talking shop. So what should happen that that's not the case?
Yeah, but I think this European conference needs a clear agenda. Where are the domains where the European Union as a whole could do more? Where are domains where the European Union could do less? I had published during my time as President of the Commission a white book on the European future with different scenarios. They have to be revisited. For me, it's crystal clear that we cannot stay where we are. We have to take further future-oriented steps.
We cannot stay where we are, but there seemed to be a certain disconnect between many European citizens and the European Union institutions. So how can we make sure that the people will have a more say in what is happening?
Well, good politics starts with listening. Yeah? Is having an idea what people expect from us, from Europe, from their European Union. And that's why the approach to start also with the involvement of citizens is a good one. Huh? That is a starting point. On the other hand, I don't think that having in mind that a lot of what also Jean-Claude described, when we listen to some of the leaders on national level, with their reluctance to consider next steps and strengthening the European Union, I'm a member of Parliament, and I say, I'm optimistic, and I don't want to talk about what is possible. I want to talk about what is needed. What do we have to do now? And we are still in the middle of an health crisis. The pandemic is all over Europe, still one of the biggest problems. People are dying every day. And Europe has no right, no legal base at all to deal with health issues, even having in mind that all Europeans understand immediately that this is needed. Immediately after the crisis now, and to protect our Schengen idea on the external border, but also internally, not to build up again borders in the European Union. So we have so much arguments for going to the citizens and tell them, and we need citizens, and we need also the colleagues on national level as real partners, as alliance, to convince then finally also the very skeptical, sometimes very negative speaking colleagues from the European Council. And I want to be frank, I hope that for the EPP, it's also clear that our colleagues on the council level will be the front runner in this regard. I want to see an engagement there, especially when we will hopefully have Armin Laschet then in office in Berlin, that I also count on him, that in the beginning of next year with the new chancellor, we will do a restart. And that means prepare for the next 10 years, look what is ahead of us, and try to give answers before crisis arrives in Europe.
And talking about the coronavirus pandemic, you have managed the European Union through many different crises, the financial crisis, the migration crisis, Brexit. So what grade would you give the European Union for managing this unprecedented pandemic?
Yes, because I think that the European Union has some weaknesses, and obviously one of the major weaknesses is the absence of competencies in the public health sector. This doesn't come as a surprise to me, because back in the Giscard years, some governments were proposing increased European competencies in the health sector, including my then government. But most of the governments, including those led by EPP members, they rejected that idea because they thought that the Commission anyway had two prerogatives, two competencies too much, and that time has come to reduce the influence of the European Commission. No, the European Union and thus the European Commission and thus the European Union has to have broader rights when it comes to the public health sector. What we were experiencing at the very beginning of the pandemic was a total disaster, because national governments, as they had no European framework to move in, they were referring to their national framework, which is not the right one. A pandemic is not limited to Luxembourg. If it had been so, it would have been easier. It's a global problem, not only as far as the European Union is concerned, but also as other parts of the globe are concerned. So we need a stronger say of the European Union in the public health sector.
You still didn't answer the question. What grade would you give the European Union?
But I'm no longer in a position to tell other people what they have to do. I'm used to the fact that I was told by all the Europeans what to do, and when I did it, they did disagree.
So what lessons have to be learned from this pandemic in terms of concrete measures?
If I may first say that I think the start of this pandemic and the first reactions were again typical for Europe. Thousands of voices, no coordination, but then finally, step by step, we delivered a common understanding. So today we can say we can arrive as the first continent to be fully vaccinated. That is a big achievement. And secondly, the recovery fund, the first time that we go to markets, borrow money, we invest now in the future of Europe, is really a huge, even historic achievement that we do this together, this recovery process. Because even in countries who are very reluctant on this approach, they understood that Italy is not responsible for COVID. So everybody understood this. And that's why I think that was good. But if you ask me in regard to the Future of Europe conference, what is the most important thing, I would say we can speak about even less Europe. But
that's interesting.
We can speak. I'm ready to talk about the competences for Europe. I think there is more Europe needed, don't get me wrong. But we even can speak about less competences. But what I think is the crucial point is we need a Europe who can also execute what is decided on European level. Look to border protection. Look to the 3% on the Euro side and so on. So the Commission only can go to the European Court of Justice, and then 3 years afterwards you have a court case outcome. We have only a few fields, for example, on the competition law, where the Commission is fully a real government of Europe. And there, Europe is strong to Apple, to Google and so on. There Europe is strong. And that's why we need also a Europe which can execute the decisions we made legally on the basis of Parliament and Council decisions, the decisions we made. That I think is a key question now for the future of Europe. Not only a lawmaker, not only a body where we talk to each other and try to find compromises, but also a level where we can execute things and implement things, because then things arrive in the daily life of citizens, when you execute things finally. So that is probably a theoretical point or a technical point, but I think for the political life, an extremely important one for the future of Europe.
And would you say that the European citizens would be in favor of that? Do you think that they want it?
Absolutely, I'm sure about this. People don't ask who is doing it. Yeah. People want to have solutions. That is what people want to have. And I think in a lot of, I give you on the pandemic a very concrete example. In Austria, there was in the shops 1 meter distance. In Germany, 1.5 meter distance. And in other countries, 2 meter distance. And people ask themselves, do the European experts have an idea how far a COVID virus is flying or transmitted and so on? You know, that's why we need an European Marie Curie Institute who defines for the European Union in general what are the rules. So that is what we need, executive competence for the European level.
And the European Commission has always been a driving force for further European integration, and you have been a vocal advocate for that. What would you say, what is now the most important goal for the European Commission, taking into consideration everything we talked about?
I think that we have to further reduce the red tape. My Commission tried to do so. We have reduced bureaucracy by 87%. Nobody knows it, because everyone is saying this has to be done. It has been done. Not
yes, that's correct.
Totally, but nevertheless, we were at the beginning of a reducing process. I do think that now we have to put our house in order. The rule of law has to be respected in an entire way. This is no longer the case. It was the case for decades that we had the common rule of law, and member states were respecting that rule of law. It is no longer the case. This has to be brought to a situation where this principle is better respected, and so I don't think that we have to compromise on this. That's for the internal point. As far as the external part of the action of the European Union is concerned, we have to make sure that in foreign and diplomatic affairs we'll be able to speak with one voice. We are not speaking with one voice because we have this principle of unanimity when it comes to foreign policy, which is to some extent ridiculous. The European Union, the European continent, is the smallest continent of the world. The Europeans are considering that we are the big guys in the world. We are not the big players. We are a very small continent, and this continent needs dramatically to speak with one voice. And so I think that in certain areas of foreign policy, the Council has to decide with qualified majority and no longer with the unanimity rule, which is leading nowhere, because from time to time it happens that one country is opposing a common view, and that's ridiculous in the eyes of the others. We have to have in mind the perception the other parts of the world have when it comes to the European Union. And then we have to reorganize our relations with other global players in the world, China, Russia being the most prominent examples, and we have to work on that. And then climate change is another global issue where the European Union has to give the lead, to take the lead.
And you just spoke about the nature of the EU's foreign policy making. And I also talked to many foreign ministers, and they told me that it's actually a good thing to have this unanimity, because then you can have a strong statement, or you can speak with one voice. You disagree?
Yeah, but they are not speaking with one voice because they have they are sticking to this principle of unanimity. They are very often, from time to time, unable to speak with one voice. Foreign policy is a too serious matter to let it being dealt with only by the foreign ministers. That's not the best way to do it.
And talking about the foreign policy, the European Union is facing a lot of challenges. Just the latest, the example in Belarus. So what do you think, what has to change so we are better equipped to face such challenges?
The key question is the decision-making process. Obviously, Belarus was such an obvious provocation of state terrorism that nobody can escape. But even already when we speak about the man behind, and that is Vladimir Putin and the Russian oligarch system, then the discussion is already going on in Europe whether we are united or not. And that brings us not to a strong voice, that brings us to nowhere, that brings us to no voice at all. That's why we have to change this. And I want to see this more from how can we explain always as politicians these structural things to citizens. And you know, I have the freedom fighters in Belarus, the young people on the streets, now in the prison. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, it was in Budapest, it was in Dresden, in Warsaw, where people went out in the street. Brave, convinced people to went out in the street, fought for freedom, for our European way of life. And having this in mind, then Europe must be on their side, on the freedom fighters' side. And we must be strong in this. And economic arguments cannot be an argument to compensate these principles. And that is what I think we have to translate things in the daily, in the emotional aspects as well for the people, that they can understand why we are doing these things. I'll give you another point where I see a need for a stronger Europe. We still have not yet a real united Europe when it is about the future perspective for young generation. A lot of people are leaving Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and these regions, and go to Austria, to Belgium, to Germany for jobs because for economic future. And I dream about a Europe where you go to Bucharest and study there. Where is it attractive to be there? So there is still so much to do in these points. And currently, after the health crisis, the biggest challenge is for us as EPP jobs. We lost last year 7% of GDP as Europeans. We are the losers of the pandemic. China won 2% even in the pandemic year. And that's why we have to do a lot to give, especially the young generation, a perspective. And if I may make this also concrete, in Jean-Claude Juncker's time, we had a real momentum on free trade, on trade agreements. We did a lot. Canada, we had Japan as the trade agreements we finished. So a lot of progress. And now I see Mercosur, I see the Chinese agreement and all the other points, everything blocked. And if Europe is not capable to keep the momentum of Jean-Claude Juncker Commission in a way, 90% of all growth in the next 10 years will be outside of the European Union.
Exactly.
Not in Europe. And that's why if we are not motivating there, and that's all tasks of our party, of the EPP, to do so, to fight for this, then we are lost. And that's why, again, there are so much subjects also for the future conference to consider now, where we need this momentum. And I think we can learn a lot from what Jean-Claude Juncker in these 5 years did. Huh?
He's becoming better and better.
Praising you.
Yeah.
But
that's a real issue, because trade is important. I know that the general public doesn't like trade agreements because they are provoked by so many voices saying that this is not in the interest of the European Union and of the European countries. But one has to know that millions of jobs are depending from foreign trade. During my mandate, we have concluded 15 trade agreements. In fact, we have trade agreements with 75 countries worldwide. So we are a major player when it comes to international trade, and there the European Commission is exclusively in charge. This is not a matter for governments, but it's a matter for the European Commission. We have concluded by the end of our mandate by Commission, a trade agreement with Mercosur. We were meeting in Buenos Aires in December 18. And all the Europeans, having attended the G20 meeting, were invited to the signature of this free trade agreement with Mercosur. The French, the Dutch, the Germans, the Italians, others. And now people are suddenly disappearing when it comes to defend the common decisions we have taken together with other parts in the world, we are lacking courage because the public opinion suddenly is discovering, rightly or wrongly, weaknesses of these trade agreements. No, no, no. If we want to play a role in international affairs, we have to stick to our competencies in the trade area. Hopefully, the European Parliament has always been the ally of the European Commission when it came to this issue, whereas member states are always trying to save their own national interest when it comes to trade agreement. No, no, it's not about France or Germany or Portugal or Ireland. It's about Europe. Europe has to represent in the world a divisive and decisive factor.
And when it is about, if you allow me, when it is about this future of Europe aspect, you cannot regulate everything with probably new structures, new regulation, probably even a new treaty. We also have to consider how the culture is among those who decide. When Jean-Claude Juncker speaks about this, then I say we need again a political class from all parties who are in Europe in the same way honest than at home. Huh?
Yeah.
And they say in Brussels things, they have to do it at home. The Brexit started with politicians in Great Britain who were not honest in European issues, who made populistic speeches, full stop. That's a reality. And then even David Cameron was part of this. And then a few months before the referendum, he said publicly, let's be in favor of Europe. And that is not possible anymore to change this. That's why we need also culture. Please be honest, please be also correct towards Europe and defend Europe if needed, if you think that is a good compromise.
And it's interesting that you mention it because I think that the current pandemic is also a good example that facing a crisis, some issues that were unthinkable of can then be discussed without taboos, like the recovery plan and Eurobonds. So do we need a crisis to get ahead of
Sometimes it seems that the European Union needs a crisis. In the last years, we are going through a poly-crisis. We had migration, we had climate, we had the economic and financial crisis. And in the middle of this crisis, people were not aware about the fact that we have to change things if we want to develop a common European response to these different crises, mainly the economic and financial crisis. Back in 2009, I was then chair of the Eurogroup. I was proposing so-called Eurobonds. Now they are there. They have a different name, but now the willingness of the Europeans have changed because they have seen, as the crisis were hitting all the European countries, that we need a common response. It could have been done 10 years earlier.
So are you in the mood told you so?
Pardon?
Are you in the mood I told you so?
No, no, no. But I told them.
So do we need a crisis, Mr. Weber, to outsmart our critics?
It is obvious that the big steps of Europe were mainly made in the last 10, 15 years after a crisis. But there were also other times. Jean-Claude at the beginning spoke about the euro. And I was a young representative of the Junge Union, the youth organization of my party in Bavaria. And I saw their party conventions where Theo Weigel stood in front of the delegates and fought for this idea without a crisis. It was a forward-looking approach. What is ahead of us? The world ahead of us. And what do we have to do to win the future? And I want to see this again. I'm an optimist. I think that it's still possible. And I would even go so far. I would say that's the best medicine against populism. If in the center you have politicians who show leadership again, who are not giving the easy populistic answer, but giving a challenging proposal for the future and having good arguments for doing so, no doubt about this, having good arguments for doing so, then it's the best medicine against populism, because today the populists have so much room because we don't have this leadership in Europe. And again, it's not a criticism because we had this crisis and nobody could consider that a pandemic will happen. So that was not foreseeable. But again, I would wish to see with this conference that we have this momentum now to consider the next 10 years in front of us and to be really ambitious.
So how dangerous is it for the European Union that now within the European Union you are looking for the new leadership, but instead you have leaders in some countries who are openly talking about illiberal democracies, President Juncker?
No, I think that this is total nonsense. I was always defending the European values when we had inside our political family the debates we had with Viktor Orban and others. It's not about illiberal democracy, it's about democracy. And one of the main elements to be respected in a democracy is the respect for the rule of law. And I think it's a major mistake if we are stepping away from the principle that the rule of law has to be respected. It's, in fact, that's a minority point of view, a protection for smaller member states. What do smaller member states inside the European Union have outside the respect for the rule of law? Then, if the rule of law is no longer respected, the say of bigger member states is more important than the say of smaller member states. And Hungary is a small member state. So Hungary should be amongst the first to insist on the respect of the rule of law.
But we don't seem to be well equipped to deal with such issues. Because we were supposed, the European Union was supposed to be a club of democracies, not dealing with illiberal democracies.
I think Jean-Claude described it very well to say that the structure of the European Union guarantees rule of law, first of all. So that we have a European Court of Justice, that for the moment Hungary and others respected always the court cases and the outcome.
Yeah.
But I have to say the legal base for the European Court of Justice to act is not strong enough. For example, media freedom and all the other points, and not European legislation. That's why the base is not so strong. And that's why allow me to say a little bit of positive thing about my institution, the European Parliament and the EPP Group. I think we fought last year a strong fight against Council in implementing a binding rule of law mechanism. The Commission has now, since 1st of January this year, the right to stop payments for Hungary, for Poland, but also for Malta on the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia and all these things. We can stop money if rule of law is not guaranteed. And I really ask now the Commission, use your rights. They have the chance now, use your rights. Taxpayers all over Europe would applaud, would be happy to have a commission, to see a commission who is ready to defend the interests when it is about our basic values. And that is for me a kind of a game changer. We have the first time such a legal base, and my hope is that we can also have a kind of a neutral assessment on all this rule of law mechanism, that it is really accepted by everyone finally.
So you're confident that this new rule of law mechanism will help?
We have it, and we have to, like always in politics, it depends about how you use your tools you have in your hands. You need the willingness, you need the determination to do it, and hopefully the Commission is ready to do so.
You know, treaties are important, and principles are important, but they are less important. People do think. What is important is the willingness of those who are in charge of the implementation of the treaties. You have perfect treaties without any kind of result because the willingness, the ambition of those who are supposed to implement these treaties is absent. You have weak treaties. But if the willingness of the leaders is there to do what has to be done, it's like a perfect treaty. And I hope that the European Conference is pushing us to put into place a legal order which takes care of all these basic principles and values of the European Union. The EPP is playing a major role under the leadership of my good friend Manfred in all this respect, mainly when it comes to the rule of law and principles of that kind. And I hope that, I'm convinced that the next German government under the leadership of Arnim Laschet will be, as Germany so often was, a real driving force inside the European Union. I'm convinced that he will do so because he is a real European, not a naive European. We don't need naive Europeans. We do not need poets in the leadership of the European Union. We need convinced people doing the right things, and Arnim Laschet will be one of them.
Of course, we have to say that we still need to see what the outcome of the elections will be, but I see
common sense will always prevail. That means that the CDU will be the European party #1 in Germany.
Okay, that still remains to be seen. But
It
of course,
will be seen.
Okay. But of course, there are many issues that are important for the European citizens and for young Europeans in particular. And we have one question coming to us from Antonio in Italy, and he asked the following question. How should the EU handle the bilateral relationship between the EU and the UK in near future, President Juncker?
We are not in a spirit of revenge. The British citizens have taken their ahistorical decision to step away from the European integration. That has been done. We have to respect that decision, and we need a friendly relationship with Britain. When I was campaigning as a Spitzenkandidat, and this system should have been maintained back in 2014, I was advocating a fair deal with Britain. And so I think that these two entities, Britain on the one side and the European Union on the other side, don't have the right to forget that they have a common history.
Well, but it doesn't seem to be so easy to get along.
As I was saying so often, everyone understands English, but nobody understands the English.
We have one more question from our young Europeans, this time from Alejandro from Spain. Maybe you could answer that. How can the EU help young Europeans to find proper jobs, very important, offer equal opportunities and eliminate the differences between countries?
Well, Alejandro, that is what we are trying to do now with the big investment, 715 billion euros, an unbelievable amount of money, which is now on the table. And especially in Spain, we have to guarantee, with a left government, I have to say, there are some doubts on the table, we have to guarantee that this money is now really invested in future and not in consumption, not in only compensating the loss of tax income. So we have to really invest in future, new markets about digital, about Green Deal, about new energy forms and all these things. There, again, there's a lot of money on the table, and if we really invest this in future, then we can create jobs. That is our contribution. And having in mind that we are establishing a European labor market as well, it's also a job opportunity. I think on the one hand, I want that everybody has at home a good perspective. That is what I want to achieve, a real European Union where we have equal living standards. But on the other hand, I like very much this open labor market, that everybody can freely move and enjoy Europe in a way, like we have it with Erasmus and other things. So that's why that is also a guarantee by Europe that you can work wherever you want to work. Now with Great Britain, for example, people experience that this is not anymore the case. So that are probably two considerations, two remarks to Alejandro.
And do you think that maybe Brexit was also something that has made people understand how good it is to be a member of the European Union? Just to see the consequences?
I think people saw over these years of negotiations under your leadership, Jean-Claude, people perceived and experienced that that's not a clever way how the Brits are doing it. That was the feeling. But again, I think the real proof will arrive in the next upcoming years. So we see already very damaging figures on the economy for Great Britain. The financial market is suffering in London. So on the long run, we will for sure see the proof that this was a lie from the Brexiteers. They lied towards the people, but I don't think that this will arrive in the short term. Yeah. That is the reality, and that's very sad to see. And that's why I fully share the approach that we must stay as friends open. The biggest problem I see is really that Johnson was even not ready to continue with Erasmus. I see this really as a big damage, that young students from Paris, from Rome, from Bucharest cannot anymore study in Great Britain. And that's a problem for Great Britain because they lose the talents. And on the other hand, it's a big burden for the next generation, because they cannot enjoy the freedom to study where they want to study.
Coming back to our topic, the future of Europe, President Juncker, 4 years ago, your Commission outlined different scenarios for the future of Europe. Where do you see the European Union in 10 or 15 years?
I have to say that I'm rather optimistic when it comes to the future of the European Union, because one of the lessons to be drawn from the pandemic crisis is that the general public and sometimes government have seen that that these national solos are a no-go area. We have to work closely together in all kind of domains. It has the pandemic and the Brexit have reinforced the feeling of many Europeans that there is no other way to organize the continent in a proper way than to work together. So I'm rather optimistic, and I have seen after Trump and after Brexit that the adherence to the European Union was growing in all the member states, because people suddenly discovered that nothing can be taken for permanent. And so I think that there is a growing feeling in all the countries of the European Union that things have to be done in a better way. That means a more pro-European way.
Would it be also your opinion? Are you also optimistic? You have to, right?
Yeah, I'm always an optimist, because by nature, as a pro-European politician convinced about this project. But probably one point is that in the past, crisis meant for citizens mainly fear, risk, danger. That was in the Euro crisis, about economic situation, about losing money and so on, stability of the currency, so fear. It was in the migration crisis about the question to lose identity. That was the most important concern from a lot of people. And now we have a kind of a crisis with the pandemic, where I see in my relatives, when I speak with my family, with people, then they have the first and probably the second shot already in their arms. And they have hope. They are optimistic now. They see we can change things, we can make things better. BioNTech, financed by the European Union. So we can do things better together. And that's why if we identify now also for the future, in this future conference, not only the technical things about how to manage things, that's extremely important, but also some flagship projects about what do we want to... I campaigned 2 years ago with the idea to make a big plan in the fight against cancer.
Yeah.
And to say people, we can beat cancer. There is a chance, all experts tell us. BioNTech was doing research on fight against cancer, not on COVID. That was a side effect in a way. So if we can identify these fields where we show that let's do it together, then I think nobody will oppose. Nobody can oppose. Even the biggest populists cannot oppose to such flagship projects for the future. And again, for me, there are a lot of these things on the table. Let's look for them. Let's discuss them now in the process for the conference for the future of Europe. And allow me, as EPP Group, we already have finalized a position paper on this, where we try to have the first thoughts. We are not at the end of our thinking, but the first thoughts described our first ideas. And we want to invite now everyone to really contribute to this discussion. It should be a lively process in front of us, where we look really for this motivating projects.
And President Juncker, maybe last question. Do you think that this conference on the future of Europe could also help improve the EU's image among young people, so they know that people here working on behalf of them really care?
Yes, this is one thinkable dimension of the European conference, but this has as a precondition that those who are gathering in this European conference will not lie. and will tell the youngsters that this is about their future life, and that nothing which has happened till now can be taken for given. The European Union and European integration and the together of the European nations is a daily duty. It's a daily duty.
Thank you so much for your input. Thank you both for your time. Thank you for listening to us. Let's talk about the future of Europe. That's certainly a discussion that has to continue. But with that, we are going to wrap up this second EPP Group Let's Talk event on the future of Europe. Keep following the conference on the future of Europe via #COFOE to continue the conversation with us online from us here in the European Parliament. Thank you for watching and goodbye for now and stay safe.